be recording them. For those who are not able to participate live, we'll share it with them afterwards. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Haley Ruman. I'm the Professional Development Manager at Creative Learning Systems. So I get the really fun job of working with all of you facilitators, helping to provide training, develop training, and just get you guys resources to help make your life easier, help make your students' experience in your SmartLab even better. So today we're hosting this webinar. This is going to be part of a bi-monthly webinar series. So every other month we'll be hosting a webinar on a different topic. We might be bringing in some experts, some facilitators to talk with us, and just give you guys some opportunity to get some PD throughout the year. So our next one will be in November, and we'll be sharing that topic coming up in the next couple weeks to month. So this webinar is focused on driving growth with rubrics. So we're going to talk about just basics of rubrics and basics of rubrics, creating rubrics, some tips, how to go about doing that, and then also some tips and strategies for using rubrics. So we've also got some rubrics to share with you guys from CLS as well as templates. So you'll be walking away with some resources that you can implement right away. We've also got Devin Slossberg with us. She's our instructional coach. So she might be chiming in every once in a while. So if you see her hop on, she's our instructional coach, providing instructional support to our facilitators and focusing specifically on helping our new facilitators with their first year in the SmartLab HQ.
Thanks, Haley. And I was just going to let you know, I'll man the chat. So if there's questions that come up, I'll help you out. So
perfect. Thanks, Devin. And definitely take advantage of that chat to ask questions, add comments. If you guys have suggestions that you'd like to share, definitely use that. All right, so we're going to start talking about just some of the basics, make sure we're all speaking the same language and we understand, the role of rubrics as well. Rubrics are really great because one, they drive student growth, and in an environment where we're really trying to promote student-led project-based learning, it can give them a tool to guide their learning and goal setting so that they know specifically what they're aiming for and how to continue improving. And because of that, it also increases student agency. They're choosing the areas that they'd like to improve on, maybe in the order that they're looking for. But also it's really important because it clarifies expectations. So it takes out the ambiguity of, what am I looking for to get an A or to know that I've done this skill or task really well. So clarifies expectations, and because it makes it really clear, it also eliminates the subjectivity in grading so that it's consistent, and it's also faster for you guys and for students to do their own self-assessment. Focuses on growth. So where are you at the beginning? How can we set goals for you to move and develop your skills more? And let's look back at, you might have been at a level 1 at the beginning of the year, and now you're already at a level 4. So really focusing on growth and not just on, here's a grade, this is the project and we're done. Rubrics is something that should be used throughout the entire year to support that process. And it encourages reflection and feedback. So giving students really specific feedback in a relatively simple way, and giving them an opportunity to reflect back on their work and have something to kind of not grade it against, but compare it against, so that they, again, understand those skills and concepts that they're working towards. There are a couple different types of topics that I wanted to highlight. Holistic rubrics, that's what you see probably for a lot of things that are graded, specifically like at the elementary level. It has one scale, so there is only really like one row of descriptors, and all the criteria is together. So you might see something like a level 3, students use technical vocabulary, include all parts of their project journal, and include pictures. So that's really like 3 different things all wrapped into one. The nice thing about this is that it's quick and easy. It also gives you kind of that high level overview or summary of performance. Downside is that the feedback isn't quite as targeted. So students may fall into one level or range, but some of the pieces may not feel totally authentic or accurate to where they are. So that's just something to keep in mind. That it's a good overview, but again, may not drill down into each specific criterion and where they are with that. Now, an analytical is kind of the opposite, where it breaks down each part of that performance skill or task into a different row on the rubric. So that's where you see like those master grids. That's what we always used in writing because we're looking at a lot of different components. Advantages are that it's detailed, gives really good feedback to students. It's great for goal setting so that they can drill into specific components of a skill or a task and set goals around that. Disadvantages, if you're creating them from scratch, it can take a long time. That's a big grid, that's a lot of descriptors, but you could also take a holistic rubric and then break it down, and that might be a great way to transition from holistic to analytical if you want something more targeted. There's also a checklist rubric. This is best for like performance tasks or just tasks. So it will indicate specific components and just descriptions of what they should include or have presented in that. And then really you're just looking to see like, is it present or is it not? So it's really a check or an X or, you know, a check or nothing. So it's easy to put together. Again, it's best for tasks or processes. Like, yep, we did that step, we included that piece. And it's one thing that is nice about it is it does help learners monitor their progress. So if they look at a checklist and they've got 5 of the boxes checked and 3 are left, they can use that to kind of set goals for the rest of their project cycle. I know these 3 things I need to still complete, and so that's what we're going to do in the next 2 or 3 days. Disadvantages, it's not great for goal setting in terms of skill development or improvement because there aren't those levels to show them, you know, what does it look like to go above and beyond, or what is that next level for me to aim for? So keep that in mind. Different purposes, you know, you may choose a different rubric. Then I also wanted to talk just briefly about like team and project or presentation rubrics. Team rubrics really focus on a student's role in the team and how they contribute to that. So it's more focused on those skills that they are exhibiting when working on a team project. Whereas a project or presentation rubric, again, it's kind of focusing on that product or performance. And so you may use that. It's really just a way to think about or a way to differentiate, am I assessing skills that a student is illustrating, or am I assessing, you know, some kind of product or presentation, the work that they've done? And not really disadvantages, just different needs based on what you are trying to assess. All right, so a couple different components of rubrics that you guys are familiar with, but you know, make sure we're all on the same page with the language you're using because we're going to talk about it throughout. So here's an example of a holistic rubric. And in some ways, this actually could be related to a kind of checklist. Does your SMART goal have all these components? And then based on what components it includes, they kind of rate themselves on the scale. But you first start with the criteria. So what are we trying to measure? What aspects are we looking at? So SMART goal, and then those 5 parts of a SMART goal are our criteria for their success. So that's what we are going to measure. Their performance levels are, in here it's level 1, 2, 3, and then challenge yourself is like a level 4. You can also use, you know, developing, approaching, meets, exceeds expectations. You may choose to do the performance levels that your school already uses because that's familiar language to your students and meaningful. You know, depends on kind of what is used across your school and sometimes the expectation or kind of past history there, you may choose to do something a little bit different to separate SmartLab. Totally up to you. One interesting conversation that I've had with one of our customers is around that top level where they're exceeding expectations. You know, I've definitely seen where students, they really struggle if they get that level 3 because they think that they haven't done what they need to be doing. But really that level 4 is an opportunity for them to really push themselves, to go above and beyond. And so we separated that out as a challenge yourself level. That way, you know, there's a little bit of separation so they know if they've got to level 3, that's what we're looking for. And if they want to go above and beyond, they can continue to work towards some of those additional skills. So that's just a little bit of explanation around this one and our performance levels. And then the descriptors are, you know, what's inside each of the level boxes, explaining how students meet that level, what it actually looks like or sounds like or consists of. So we're going to go into kind of the process of creating rubrics, as well as some recommendations for how you go about creating rubrics with for your SmartLab HQ program or your SmartLab Studio program. We'll also talk a little bit about creating rubrics with your students, because I know that that is something that some facilitators are interested in. So we'll dive a little bit into that process, how you can go about rolling that out, and some recommendations for doing that. So we've got some templates that you can use to create your own rubrics for SmartLab Learning. We've got both analytical and holistic rubrics, so you can choose which one is going to work best based on what you are trying to assess. But the first step in creating a rubric is, you know, really reviewing and understanding that learning objective. What are we asking or trying to get learners to practice, develop, master? Could be a skill like communicating with technical vocabulary, or just communication, you know, with their partners. Could be a concept that we're asking them to explore or apply, or a task that we want them to complete. Once you understand, you know, what are you trying to assess, then you'll pick your rubric. Again, use that chart with the advantages and disadvantages and descriptors to help you figure out which one is going to work best for what you're trying to assess or have your learners assess. And then identify that performance criteria to be evaluated. So if we look at communication, we might look at, you know, the criteria might include, let's see, using technical vocabulary, asking clarifying questions, and so on. And for that one, sounds like analytical would probably be the best. If you wanted to focus on just one aspect of it, you definitely could. You could use a holistic rubric and just have, you know, asking clarifying questions, and then continue to layer additional components on top of that. So depends how you want to roll out your use of rubrics, as well as what criteria you're trying to evaluate. Then you'll determine the number of performance levels and write those descriptors for each criterion and its corresponding performance level. As you're doing that, we've got some questions along the side just to help prompt the creation of some of these that are on the left side. So these questions come from ASU. They've got some really great guiding questions. I linked the article there if anyone wants to check it out for some more information or guidance. So when creating rubrics, we wanted to share just some best practices, tips to help you out. So for that learning objective, again, you're going to develop one or identify one or more skill, concept, or attitude that they are developing in that project or in over the course of the project or the course of a year. I definitely recommend doing something that is open-ended enough, you know, a skill that all students can apply regardless of what tool or project they're completing. You'll also want to make sure that as you get working on your rubric, that it is aligned to that objective, that there aren't any gaps or kind of mismatches, so that when students see that rubric, they say, yep, this is something I'm doing, and not confused about like, we haven't talked about that yet. So will also be helpful to incorporate, some mini lessons, some discussions around this stuff, do a little crowdsourcing of strategies that students can use to be successful with that skill. It'll definitely be important to incorporate that as well. And again, focusing on essential skills, the SmartLab learning process, that process of explore, plan, do, reflect, and share. You can definitely tie into that, as well as any other overarching skills or concepts. I know some schools are focusing on things like ISTE standards or mathematical practices, and you could definitely incorporate rubrics around those as well, because they are present in, the process and just most of the projects. In terms of coming up with the performance criteria, that's where you're going to really nail down into, what is it about communication that we're expecting students to do, or asking them to do. And again, just reiterating that criteria is open-ended enough that it's going to apply for any project. Part of that is because those are really great transferable skills or concepts that students can take into the future. So it's great for college and career readiness, but also for you, trying to create a rubric or set of rubrics for every project would be really time consuming. So best bang for your buck is focusing on some of those overarching ones that enriches students' projects and experiences regardless of the specific tool, or project that they choose. When you're developing the performance levels, it's recommended 3 to 5. 3 gives them multiple kind of areas to grow if they're starting at that lowest level. If you get more than 5, then it's just kind of overwhelming and a lot. And the differences between each level becomes very minute usually. So it makes it harder to grade and harder for students to assess and figure out exactly what level they are. When you're creating those labels for the levels like level 1, 2, 3, again, make sure they're student friendly, that they are meaningful to students, they understand what those mean, and that they have neutral or positive language. One tip I saw that I really liked is that if you have a 0 in your rubric, so if you've got points like 0 to 1, 2 to 3, 4 to 5, that 0, if you label or add the descriptor as not enough evidence to accurately assess performance, just haven't seen enough demonstration of their work, that lets them understand they just need to continue practicing and showing what they know, because if they're submitting something, there's something there. Hard to get a total 0. So if they just haven't completed a project, we really don't have enough evidence to accurately assess them. So that's a nice way for them to understand that a 0 doesn't mean that I had nothing of value. It just means I didn't complete it or turn it in or have enough of it completed to really be able to assess something. So then your next level up would have, it would definitely be missing some components, and you can include that in your descriptors. When you're writing the performance level descriptors, make sure they're observable so they can see them in some way, whether that's a behavior, something they're documenting, a part that they're including, they're measurable, and that they're clear. Again, you just want to make sure that from a level 1 to level 2, the difference is great enough that they can figure that out. And that's clear in the language that you're using, or maybe the numbers that you're using. Like level 1, you've got 0 to 1 of these components that we're looking for. Level 2, you've got 3 to 4. That's really easy for students to count and to explain how they got to that self-assessment. One recommendation is to start with that proficient level. Like, what are you expecting students to do? What is acceptable? And then build the other levels from there. What do we want to see added on if they are going above and beyond. What do we want to see if they're missing some components, or if they're like significantly, they're missing a lot, they're not demonstrating a majority of what we're looking for. One activity that you can do if you're struggling with really naming those differences is gather some student work and sort them out. How would you like naturally sort them into different piles or levels, and then look at those examples and see like what really made you sort them a little bit differently? What were the commonalities? So that can also help you write some of those descriptors. Because SmartLab HQ, focuses on project-based learning, and we're so focused on, those soft 21st century essential skills. There's a lot of names for what we could call them, but we know that those skills are just essential to college and career readiness, whether they go in, straight into a career or into college. Transferable, it's going to help them be successful really regardless of what they do post-school. And so here are a list of some that you might include. These specifically, most of these are included in the Colorado Department of Education's essential skills kind of for their graduates that they've determined help students succeed, lifelong. So these are familiar to most of you, I'm sure. But if you need a reminder or kind of a list to go off, you can definitely use this. Another way to build some of your rubrics is you can build them around the SmartLab learning process. So knowing that students move through these 5 stages of completing their process or encountering a new concept, learning how to use a new tool, they are performing slightly different tasks and demonstrating skills throughout each of those steps. So I've listed some examples, like explore, usually they're exploring a new tool or concept or resource. And so asking them to stop and ask some questions that they have, engage their curiosity, start that inquiry process, and then as they explore, answer those questions. And they can pull information from resources that they have. It's a really strong, big literacy skill, but can also be applied in this context, where instead of referencing a piece of literature, they might be referencing something that they tried, a resource that they found. They should still have some evidence to explain, how they got to that answer of their question. They're doing lots of problem solving, since usually this is a new tool to them, and they're figuring out how it works without as many resources. You can also assess like how they bring in their background knowledge, how they were able to connect it to things that they already know. That could also be part of how you assess that explore stage. When it comes to planning, they're writing their goal. So that's a big one. We've got a rubric for goals that you can incorporate. But also during this planning stage, they might be brainstorming possible solutions. So you could assess, how many solutions they come up with, hopefully just more than one, so they can evaluate it. Figuring out just the pros and cons of their solutions. That's another criterion that you could add, and justifying their reason for which solution they chose to go with. Time management, coming up with a plan of, what tasks is this going to involve and how are we going to go about doing this? And then evaluating constraints and requirements as well. That's a really great piece of the engineering design process that is good to pull in, so that they have kind of their barriers or their guardrails as they're working on their project. They know what constraints might be time, might be resources that they're up against, or that they have to take into consideration. The next step, when they move in to do it, they're starting to work on their project. Goal and progress monitoring. So how are they monitoring their progress towards their SMART goal, and making adjustments as needed? If something unexpected comes up, how do we adapt? Do we limit the scope of our goal a little bit because we know this piece is going to take longer? Do we switch it a little bit because we realize something doesn't work? How do they adapt as they are working? Of course, problem solving, drawing conclusions. What did they learn about that tool or that concept as they were working? And then supporting reasoning with evidence. That's just backing up those conclusions. Collaboration, of course, and a mathematical practice, use of models. Most of their projects, they're building a model. So that can be a good one to incorporate as well. When you get to the reflect step, which might occur daily as kind of a daily reflection, or when they're working on their project, you might have intentional time built in for reflection, which is always great. This is where they're going to be documenting their learning a bit more, and you may have them focus on using technical vocabulary, how they explain their thinking, critical thinking as well. And again, goal setting. You'll notice that's a common thread, and rubrics will definitely help with that. When they get to sharing, this is going to look different in a lot of different schools and based on your grade level. So this will probably be the most customized piece based on whether you're doing discussions or Flipgrid videos, or they're doing a formal presentation. So you can definitely incorporate kind of main topic and supporting details. Make sure that they've got a clear message and they've got evidence or again, details to back it up. Public speaking, also a really important one. Having practice at that is definitely good. And then entrepreneurship as well. What are they doing with this afterwards? Might also be like community involvement or sharing with an authentic audience. Sorry, I've got a yawning puppy behind me. But that's definitely a couple ways that you can assess that SmartLab learning process. And I definitely recommend embedding these directly into your documentation. So if it's in your journal, maybe you put a little rubric at the bottom of the slide or as the next page, and students can, either add a shape or add a little arrow to point or text on top to indicate what level they think they've reached that day, what their work is demonstrating. And that's really nice as well, just to give them, if it's already embedded in their rubric, before they start working that day, they can flip to it, kind of see like, what is the goal? What am I reaching for if I'm trying to do a really great job at doing my project? What does a exemplar SmartLab learner kind of look like? So that's a great opportunity, have them self-assess throughout the project cycle. So here is an example of the SMART goal one. We kind of looked at that a little bit earlier, but here it is a little bit larger. And it's got, those performance levels, the descriptors, and we're measuring the SMART goals like criterion. So we will be sharing the whole set of these with you. Also includes project management, collaboration, project presentation, project journal, those big components of SmartLab learning. Now, creating rubrics with students, that can sound like a big task, but the really nice thing about creating rubrics with students is there's different ways you can roll it out and implement with them. So you can start with something really basic, like have a draft of a rubric and share it with your students, do a little feedback protocol and have them jot down questions they have. Maybe if they think a criterion and one of the descriptors should move a level a little bit. Maybe they think of something that should be part of that rubric that you hadn't considered yet. So give them an opportunity to have a voice in that process. And, that just invest them in the process and the creation. They take ownership in that, and it also just increases their understanding of it. So they know very intimately what it includes, what it means, because you guys have co-constructed it. You could also provide a partial draft, like maybe you've got the framework, you've got the levels, maybe you've got that kind of level 3, what is proficient, and they're going to help you with the other levels. Or maybe you've just indicated what the criteria are, and you want them coming up with the descriptors. You could also, and that's more of, you're going to be helping to guide that process. Another strategy is that you could have them really develop it from scratch. So you may assign each group of learners, for an analytical rubric. Maybe they each have a different criterion. One group is going to talk about levels 1 through 4 for using technical vocabulary and what that looks like. One group is going to focus on asking clarifying questions and what that looks like. So you could definitely divide it up and have it be, a full class created project with small groups doing each section to make it a little bit more manageable and make sure that every student has a voice in that process and doesn't get, it's hard when you've got a whole group and trying to take in the feedback of 30 different students. So this is a way that you can break it down and put them in more manageable groups. As you're doing that, so if you choose that you want to create rubrics with your students, I definitely recommend having exemplars for learners to look at first. So maybe you've got some projects around the room, you've got an anchor chart for them to jot down what they notice, what they wonder, what they think. There's a little feedback protocol that you can implement there to kind of structure that process. But really have learners look for, like, what is a strength of this either product, could be a video of students talking to each other. What do we notice that is great? What do we notice that maybe they could do better next time? And using some of those notes to help them formulate those descriptors and those levels. It's also helpful to give them a set of questions to answer. So maybe we're focused on collaboration, and you might ask them a couple guiding questions of, like, what does that look like? What are some strategies that we've used? What do you like when you're working with someone else that they do? So getting kind of their juices flowing, give them a little bit of focus. And there is an article there that has some ideas of questions that you can ask and how you could structure that part of kind of the launch of rubric creation. Now, once you've got your rubrics created, it's time to kind of introduce them and implement them with your students. There's a lot of different ways and kind of entry points into your rubrics. So you could definitely use it as a pre-assessment. So at the beginning of the year, establish a baseline of kind of where are they right now. You'll want to introduce that from the beginning to make sure that they know what is expected, what they're working towards, for the year. And after their first project, then they can actually assess their work. Or maybe after their first activity where they're collaborating, you might have them do that as a pre-assessment. Because they're going to need a little bit of work to kind of practice and then be able to reflect back on. Nice thing about using it in this way is that as a teacher, you can then use this for some small group instruction. So maybe you realize that you've got a group of students who are still really struggling with that collaboration piece. And so you might pull them together and talk a little bit about, like, what does a good collaborator do? Or have some whole class little mini lessons or discussions to focus on what does that look like? What are strategies we can try? And incorporate those as a little bit more of a stronger theme throughout that project cycle or throughout that month even. You can also use it as a formative assessment, use it to track their progress towards the completion of a task or project. So that's more like, their full project or their project journal. Do they have all the components in there? Or could be a checklist kind of associated with the process. You can also use that just to assess essential skills. So if it's collaboration, they're doing that daily. So you've got daily opportunities to stop and do a quick formative assessment. Time management, same thing. What goal did you set at the beginning of the class? Did you meet it? Why or why not? And what can we do better next time? So this is, these are really great opportunities for quick kind of check-ins, self-assessments, and let's do something tomorrow to improve. You can also use it as a summative assessment, of course, at the end of a project, capture their performance, as a whole over the course of that project. But again, continuing to focus on growth and goal setting, even if it's a summative assessment. Another way to use it is to incorporate it into your portfolio. So maybe you've got these 5 major areas or essential skills you're focusing on for the school year, and you want students to submit artifacts every quarter for each of those. Find something, a video, a picture, one of your slides that really demonstrated communication well. Find something that demonstrates collaboration. And then you've got, over the course of a year, multiple artifacts that'll demonstrate their growth in that rubric. It also involves, them in that year-long process of assessment and showing them that it's not just one project or test, but it's accumulation of my work that is demonstrating who I am, how I have progressed as a learner. And again, goal setting, this is probably the biggest one. Ask learners to self-assess with that. It's also great if you can help give some feedback as well. I know a lot of my students ended up being way harder on themselves than I was. And so it was helpful for me to say, like, no, let's look, like, you did this, you met this level. Or if they don't totally understand the expectations, or maybe are a little generous with their grades, it's a great conversation to have about, like, these are the pieces we're looking for, let's find them. And if we don't find them, then let's look at the descriptor of another level. So that's really nice if you're doing kind of overarching goal setting, not specifically within a project, but just overall. At the end of a project cycle, when students have cleaned up, put away all of their resources, they've done their sharing, having them to stop, self-assess real quick, and then set a goal and a plan of action, for how they're going to meet that goal. Some of that, they may benefit from doing that process with you, that plan of action, or maybe having some options of, if this is something you want to focus on, you can try these strategies. You can meet with me on Tuesdays to talk about collaboration, etc. All right, so when introducing rubrics, definitely share them at the beginning before you're going to assess any work. We don't want it to be a surprise, and we want students to understand what we're looking for, so that they, have that focused path that they're gonna kind of travel along. You can also consider rolling out one rubric or criterion at a time. And that way you can focus your mini lessons and just that one-on-one support on one criterion at a time. So maybe you do a little short mini lesson at the beginning of a project cycle on clarifying questions, and that's the rubric you're going to use that week or that month, depending on how long your project cycle is, and have that theme throughout. Maybe you guys have discussions around it and you're able to really support that one. And then you add something else on top of it. So that's another approach if you want to kind of start out small and build from there. Something that could be really helpful for your students is to conduct a tuning activity. So have them sort examples and non-examples into different levels. So maybe you kind of set up a rubric on the floor in your room or on the board, and then have students like physically sort examples so that they know what each one looks like. Sorry, one second. All right, so then another thing that you'll want to try is having students practice the self-assessment piece. And it might be helpful to have an example or a sample they can use. Take one from a previous learner that you've had and remove the names, of course, and then have them self-assess or assess that. So there's a little, separation between their work and the assessment. They get a little bit of practice, and then have them assess a piece of their own work. So that opportunity to practice and then kind of come back together and talk is really great, especially if you're going to have all learners practice assessing with, one sample. You might come back together and discuss, like, how did you assess that? If we don't agree, why? Let's talk about it. Let's come to some conclusion, make sure that we're on the same page about how we're going to assess with this rubric. And again, just incorporating these rubrics daily. It doesn't have to be a big, extensive thing. It could be a quick exit ticket, could be embedded in your journal, could be quick, like fist to 5, or fist to 4 if you've got 4 levels. Here's our rubric real quick. How do you think you did today? Put your fingers up or in front of your chest. Okay, think about what you want to do differently tomorrow, or what you want to continue doing tomorrow, and maybe setting a quick mental goal. So lots of ways that you can incorporate this, from kind of basic and simple to a little more advanced and complex. So we've got a number of rubrics that we're going to share with you. One around SMART goal, one around collaboration, one around their project journal. So what are they including in that, and the quality of that. Project management, which includes time management, and then their project presentation. So those are already published actually on our Launchpad in the documentation section. So I encourage you to check those out, and definitely check out those challenge yourself sections. Those are really nice ways for them to stretch themselves, definitely go above and beyond, try to aim a little bit high. So they had multiple opportunities to practice how they can advance that skill. After this webinar, we'll be sending out links to access the rubrics, the rubric templates, as well as the rubric creation guide. All of those things will live on the Launchpad, along with our other documentation resources. If you need tips for creating Google Sites with your students, if you need tips and templates for, primary and elementary documentation, those are all in there as well. And we now have rubrics that you can access. So we'll be continuing to add more of these rubric resources. We're really excited to see what you guys come up with as well. I highly recommend, if you haven't joined the Creative Learning Systems SmartLab Facilitators group on Facebook, definitely join and check it out, and please share any rubrics that you create. I know that all of the facilitators across the United States would definitely love to see them and use them, and share and see what other Smart Labs are assessing in their programs. All right, we've got a little bit of time left, ended a little bit early. If you guys have questions, definitely pop them in the chat. Otherwise, take some time to process, take a look at the resources. If you have questions for us, whether that's advice or you're looking for a different resource, we've got our email there and our phone number that you can contact us with. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We hope these resources will be helpful, and we look forward to seeing you at our November SmartLab Learning webinar.
Thanks, Haley.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.